Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's the Addams Family Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt, brought to us by Ocean. Based on the Addams Family animated cartoon that ran for 2 seasons in 1992, Scavenger Hunt has you playing as Pugsley, collecting a variety of different items around the Addams Family mansion. I became a big fan of the Addams Family during this era, from the cartoon as well as the live-action movies, and from there my fandom continues to this day, going back and of course watching the classics, and still very much enjoying it. The game is a pretty simplistic platformer with not a whole lot going on in it, and while I prefer the first Addams Family game based on the first movie, I still do enjoy this one for the most part. When we begin the game, we're going to drop down to the options. You can change up how many lives you start off with, as well as how many hearts you start off with. Of course, decreasing the amount of lives and hearts makes the game more difficult and basically works as the difficulty settings, though there really is very little, and I mean extremely little difference as far as the ending is concerned for changing up the hearts and selecting that harder difficulty, since the ending is just text. One thing that is cool is you have access to a few different areas of the Addams Family mansion from the get-go. You can do the ones that you have access to in any order, and as you complete them, you'll get items and you'll be able to enter into the doors that you aren't able to at the start, eventually opening up the final area where you'll be able to go through and defeat the final boss. We're going to start off, though, in the bathroom. There's actually some nice colorful graphics and animations that are going on throughout the backgrounds of some of the areas. Platforming, similar to the first Addams Family platformer on Snes, has a very kind of slippery feel to it and a very floatiness to Pugsley as he jumps in the air, which takes a bit to get used to, but for the most part is pretty simple to control. In this room, we're going to start off by heading up, breaking open these blocks by hitting the silhouette of them, which will make them appear. We'll be able to climb up and then hit a switch on the left side to get the rest of them to appear. While it's pretty much straightforward, there are a small handful of little puzzles, like for example here, you have to hit the blocks in a certain order in order to get the next set of blocks to appear. There's usually only 3 or 4 blocks like this, and it's pretty simple patterns that you'll have to do in order to get them to appear, which can be a bit frustrating at times, but probably won't set you back too long. In the next room, be very careful getting through this area since there are these ducks all around, and you'll need to hit the switch to drop on down to the next segment. As you can see, everything is extremely fast-paced, so when you're first playing the game, you'll probably want to take your time. Thankfully, you can jump on the heads or on top of most enemies in order to defeat them, just like a classic Mario platformer. Thankfully, you'll usually always know that you're making progress because of the exit signs that are represented right next to the doors that leave each area, so you know if you've accidentally gone backwards or if you're not going quite the right way. These blocks here will disappear as soon as you stand on them, so you want to make sure you get by quickly. I'm taking my time into this lower left corner and waiting for these kind of ducks to kind of keep moving around so that I can slowly make my way up. This is a little bit of a pain of a room for sure. As we climb up here, we're going to head over to the left side, take out the frogs before attempting to make the jump. You can land on the first set of silhouetted platforms, but then you'll have to hit the upper ones with your head in order to get them to appear, where you can then grab this question mark. We have to grab a couple of these question marks in order to access the exit door. Keep moving along the area, you'll see this giant bottle of perfume that's kind of set up. Run through the wall, as you can actually run through it, to grab the next of the question marks. Then in the upper left corner here, we grab the third one through another one of those walls that you can just run through. From there, that gets rid of all the blocks that are located right next to that exit door, so that we're able to go through and continue on the level. Thankfully, the next segment is a little bit of just straight platforming, which I definitely enjoy, trying to keep that speed moving while running on through. Here you have to drop down in order to hit this unhappy block in order to get rid of the blocks next to it, and then the question mark to get rid of the next set before dropping down the next exit. When you do drop down here, though, you're now in an underwater segment. Swimming is awkward in the game. Like, there's a lot of weight, of course, to Pugsley, and the awkwardness of his overall sprite can make trying to get around things a bit of a challenge. Though, thankfully, it's not nearly as bad as the Addams Family games on the NES as far as swimming is concerned. The underwater segment's pretty straightforward. A few annoying enemies, the stars that are stationary, these guys that fall and break apart and spread out a whole bunch of spiky objects towards you, and the pretty annoying cats that are constantly spewing out bones that you have to kind of get in between their projectiles so that you can make it through. Up here, you need to kind of take out the fish and swim all the way up to the very top here. This is what gets rid of the wall to the right. It's a bit weird, but for whatever reason, that's what ends up triggering it to get rid of it. On the far right, though, you can drop on down through the opening, and this will take you to the next underwater segment. Now, once you're in here, start working your way down. There's still the same kind of enemies, so you're probably starting to get used to how to swim around them and the weight of Pugsley overall. It can be difficult a lot of times to try to get through these areas. Once you make it down here, it's a little bit of a maze-like area kind of set up that you'll have to weave in and out of in order to kind of get through. Take out this cap before heading on down. You have to kind of just slowly work your way. Eventually you'll make it to the bottom of the area, and as you saw on the left side there was a bit of an opening, so we're now going to swim over there and finish up this area. Like I said, the swimming of Pugsley can be a bit of a challenge as far as getting him to move quickly. In the next segment, you have some starfish things that are kind of bouncing around. Watch out for those, and then head up through the opening right above you. There's a couple of those cats waiting for you. Drop down the next little small opening between all of the enemies and continue along the path. As soon as you can go up again, head up there, watching out for another one of those exploding guys, and start kind of heading over left a little bit. You can swim through the floor here, and this will allow you to get up to the next segment. Another one of those kind of tricky areas that can be a bit difficult to figure out. Once you swim through, you can crawl actually on the ground and get underneath the next set of those weird star spike things. The game will probably slow down a lot for you during this segment because there's just so much going on, which sometimes can help you, but with how slow Pugsley moves, it can be difficult to kind of maneuver around while the game's slowing down. Thankfully, not too much longer, though, of this segment, as we now head up here, a few more of those annoying cats and fish, before we finally end up finishing up the section. Now it's time for the first boss fight of the game. It's an octopus that has 4 arms that kind of move around it. You basically just have to stay in between them and just keep moving around, and every time you get right above him, where you can see the bandage is currently located, if you do it right, you can drop down on top of him in order to do damage. It's a little bit tricky. You want to hit him and then immediately swim up or away from him, because as soon as he kind of like retracts back up, he could potentially end up doing damage to you. The hit detection and hitbox is far from perfect in this fight. It's overall, though, a pretty simple fight, and once he's defeated, we get our first item and we're moving on to the next segment. After completing an area, you go back to the main set of rooms for the Addams Family mansion. From where we were, though, we're going to head up and head into the attic. Now, this is a weird segment. This is Granny's area that's kind of looking through this crystal ball, so you have a very weird view as far as being able to see what's going on. So you don't quite have the entire screen at your disposal to see exactly what's happening, which makes this segment particularly difficult, especially with so many spikes, knights, fire, and everything else kind of going on in it. In the next room, hit the left upper block, and this will open up the area and you can start climbing up. You have these swinging spike balls or half mace balls that you'll be able to stand on top of them in order to keep moving through the area. Thankfully, the guillotines you can stand on top of and use them to kind of ride up and platform off of them. There's some health located in the upper right corner here, thankfully, to help you out before you start dodging in and out of the bugs, as well as the spikes on the ceiling and floor. Hit the block to open up the wall and continue on. You'll have to jump between a few chains with a whole bunch of spikes on the bottom, ones on the left and right sides as you climb up. Just a lot of death going on during this segment. There's no, unfortunately, exit signs during this segment, but thankfully there really isn't multiple exits or anything, so once you find the next gate, you're just going to be going through that to continue on. Make a large leap over to the left side where you can grab on these chains and then climb up. As you probably noticed, there's not a whole lot of collectibles or anything in the game. There are the money symbols that you can collect, and getting 50 of them will end up getting you an extra life. But other than that, there's some points, as well as those question marks that represent a variety of different things, including, of course, the switches that we need to activate sometimes. In this next room, it's a little bit difficult. You have fireballs coming your way as well as blocks that don't appear until you end up landing on them. This segment here is particularly difficult as you're jumping over fire. The game's probably going to slow down and you have all these guys trying to poke you with spears. It's amazing just how much they're throwing at you in just this one corridor of this area. Wait for the fireballs at the end to finally go off screen and we can drop down in order to hit that next gate. In this segment here, I'm going to make a nice running jump over to the left side and then run up this ramp where I can hit the next question mark block to get these blocks to appear on that left side. Then start to climb my way up, jumping over another guillotine before climbing up another large chain. You'll see the door that we need to go into, but we can't do that yet. We have to go all the way to the left and hit these blocks in the correct order in order to get the blocks on the right to go away, and we can finally enter the door. Now, this is the next boss encounter, this large dragon. A pretty easy fight considering the area in general that we've been in. He flies around, he'll throw some fireballs at you. When they hit the wall, they bounce off and then hit the ground and will cause fire to be on the ground for a few moments, which is pretty easy to get around. He'll also stop every so often and throw fireballs up into the air that will then land in an arcing pattern on the ground doing the same thing. Once you've delivered enough hits though, he's defeated, we get the dragon's fire item and move on to the next segment. Now next up we're going to be traveling to the actual attic this time, even though we pretty much did that. Instead we were inside the crystal ball of Granny. This is actually officially what is known as the attic. Have a whole bunch of these mice enemies that are moving around. You'll have these dynamite that we have to end up pressing in order to get things to activate. Now this is a pretty challenging area, kind of getting used to riding the cannonballs of the giant cannons, which will help you as far as destroying certain blocks and walls as we make our way through the attic. Up here, watch out for all the rotating spiky balls. You can kind of crawl underneath of them, jump over them. Next segment, watch out for the mouse throwing cheese in your way, and then hit the dynamite to the left, the activator. Once you've hit that one, you drop down and hit the next one of the plungers, and now you're going to have to use the cannonballs in order to get to the blocks. So like I said, this takes a little bit of practice sometimes. You got to ride it all the way down and then jump off at the end so that it's able to blow open the wall. Next, you're going to be doing more of the same, but first we're going to drop down here and hit this question mark. Once we've done so, head on back to where the first cannon was. Now what we're going to do is jump on top of the cannonball, and we're going to ride this all the way down, jump up here, jump on it again, and then ride it all the way over to the left, where it will finally destroy the wall and we can go through to the next segment. Thankfully, pretty short next segment, just climb up, watch out for a few mice, and then drop into the next area. Once here, plenty more mice and flying enemies. Hit this question mark and then backtrack just a little bit back to where the cannon was. Here we can now jump up through this opening and go through the next entrance to the next section. Once here, this thing above us will explode. Wait for it to do so as this enemy kind of bounces back and forth where we're finally able to jump on top of them. You can grab an item located inside the wall if you want to, and then you can use the cannonball in order to kind of jump up to the top platform. In the next segment, you have giant missiles coming from both the left and right side. Thankfully, you can jump on the missile and ride them, but if they hit you directly head on, they will of course do some damage to you. After dealing with that, head on up. You'll see some things above you, but we can't quite reach that, so we have to go through this opening. While everything is relatively straightforward for the game, there are a couple of secrets here and there, some hidden rooms where you can find some extra bits of money and the like, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Over here, we have to ride the cannonballs down and destroy wall segment after wall segment so that we can make it over to the left. Once you make it down here, head to the left and grab the question mark, and then you're going to be using the cannon just to the right of it. Get on the cannonball and you have to ride it down, then jump on the platform and do it again in order to go through this wall and grab another one of the question marks. This will open up the final wall for this segment so we can go through the next door. Right in here, we have more missiles coming our way, but a little bit less of a straightforward path. We have to do a bit of a winding one as we start to work our way upwards while the missiles start flying in from both sides. Here we can ride this missile and get over to the right where we're able to hit this plunger, and then jump back. Make sure that you grab the question mark as it will send you upwards, teleporting you a little bit to the top part. Once up here, hit another one of those TNT plungers to the left, and then go through the door in the upper right corner. Now for this segment, we're going to jump on this cannon, which will allow us to kind of get over a large portion of the spikes. Ride it to the next platform, and then wait for the next cannonball to appear so that you can ride it across the next gap. Here, you're going to use the cannonball, and you have to kind of just barely get it down low enough so you're able to break open the block, get down, and hitting the next plunger. You're then going to be doing more cannonball riding as you're trying to make your way through the spikes. Make sure that you duck, as it'll give you obviously a better opportunity to kind of sneak on through all of the perils. Over to the right, grab another question mark block, which will destroy a bunch of the blocks, allowing you access to the door just above it. Here you can destroy the enemies, which will open up the floor a bit so that you can travel downwards. There's then a cannon right below it that will destroy a wall. You will have to ride another cannonball to the left side to destroy this wall. Hitting this thing here will cause a whole bunch of little money to appear, so you can grab all of that before going through another door. Pretty much more of the same in the next room. More cannonballs and plenty of the enemies that we've been dealing with thus far. The game really loves to overload areas with tons of enemies. Use the cannonball to get into the upper left corner where you can grab another one of the question marks. This will allow us access to go downwards and continue on through this area. We're slowly nearing the end of the attic here. The next room is pretty straightforward, just a lot of enemies, more missiles, and the like as we try to make our way. You basically just want to take your time as much as you can, because thankfully there's no rush or anything. Just slowly work your way through, dealing with each enemy, before making it to the end where we finally face off with the boss for the attic. It's a giant mouse, no real surprise. He has little mice that run across the bottom. Every so often when he makes his little jumps, he'll also have cheese that flies out of both the left and right sides of him. When he makes it to one side of the screen, he'll kind of stomp, causing 3 pieces of cheese to fall down from the ceiling. Just keep jumping on him every time you get the opportunity to, and eventually he'll go down. The attic overall is a much easier area than the 2 that we've already done, so really that boss is kind of like the first one you probably should end up facing off with. But like I said, you have access to areas, and you can pretty much do them whatever order that you like, and I usually like to start with the bathroom since it's a relatively challenging one to get done first. Next, we're going to be heading to the laboratory. Heading through here, we're actually going to get shrunken down and have to travel throughout Uncle Fester's lab. As we've seen with the other areas we've already explored, it's a pretty straightforward path, especially to begin with. You can grab this question mark and it'll cause some blocks to appear, stopping you from getting some of those money symbols. Going through the door though, continuing on, you have a bunch of flames that pop out, as well as the rolling eyeballs and the little tiny bugs that are all kind of flying and slowly moving their way around. Climb up here, hitting the blocks, you'll get these other blocks to appear, which will allow you access to the door. Start off the next area, we're going to start heading upwards, watching out for these flames, and get to this moving up and down platform on the left, which will then allow us to platform over to the right. As you climb up here, there's a lot of eyeballs that are going to be rolling around, which will probably cause the screen to scroll up a bit, especially when all that money kind of pops in from the right. So be careful of that before going through the electric fields that are set up. Just have to kind of wait for them to shut off before you're able to continue. You hit the block, and then you're going to ride up this platform to the top. Try to, once again, avoid the electricity as it stops and starts over and over. Grab an extra life on the left side if you do need it, before continuing over to the right, waiting for another platform. Lots of enemies, so once again, plenty of slowdown coming our way. One thing that I found great about the early 90s with the Addams Family was the amount of games that they released, and a lot of them ended up being different from one another. The first one I ever played, of course, was Fester's Quest, but my favorite is the Addams Family on the Super Nintendo, which there was a plethora of versions of on the NES, TurboGrafx CD, and a lot of versions were very different from one another. And then this version, Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt, came out for the Super Nintendo first, but then later had versions for the Game Boy and then the NES, which is slightly different from the SNES version, but the same kind of basic goal that's going on for it. Down here, you have to be very careful of all the electricity that is building up, and you have to kind of dodge in between, hit the block at the end, which will allow us to go through the door and continue on to that next segment. One of the things that adds up to the difficulty of this game in particular is the fact it doesn't end up having a password system or any sort of save feature, though interestingly enough, the Nintendo and Game Boy versions of Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt did have a password system involved. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of strategy really for a lot of the areas. It comes down to pretty much the precision of waiting for your opportunity to kind of go through and trying to jump past many of the enemies as easily as you can. Climb up here and head on through to the next door. Once in the next room, just wait a second or so for the electricity to go away before dropping down. You do have these kind of things set up where they're going to be spewing fire around, so be careful of those. You then have to hit these blocks from starting with the right one to the left one, and which will open up the wall so you can continue on. Here's a little tricky because the blocks kind of disappearing and reappearing as you're kind of like jumping around, but eventually you want to make your way to the left corner and jump up, and this will allow you to kind of run across all the way to the right to continue on. Right above that, though, is another one of those pot spewing stuff, so be careful of that. You can bounce off the enemy here if you like to, and kind of get up to the top portion and run across quickly. As long as you keep speed up, you'll be able to easily run all the way over. Don't have too much farther left to go here in the lab. It's pretty much the longest of the final areas I think that we have left in the game, as we have only 2 more that we'll be traveling to after we complete this one. Be careful of these flames as the platform will come down. You can kind of jump to it, but the flames reach above the platform just barely, so you want to be careful of that. Once again, more of the kind of like appearing blocks out of nowhere, which can be a bit difficult as we head up to the top. You can then bounce off a series of enemies to get up to these blocks, hitting them in the right order so that you can then go up to the top section. Now right here, we're going to wait a moment for this kind of get retracted from the skeleton so that we can run to the left and hit this block. Then head back over to the right where we can get this other block to appear, and now can head up to get to the door. For the boss of the laboratory, it's the happy spider guy, and he's going to start kind of swinging back and forth left and right. You have a couple of platforms that you can stand on throughout. He summons a few other bugs that kind of move across the webbing in the background. It sometimes is difficult to judge exactly where to hit him because the hitbox on top of his head can be a bit difficult. But if you time it right, you can actually do multiple attacks against him every time that he ends up sweeping down. Overall, a pretty simple fight, and once we've gotten the spider venom, we now have only 2 items left on our list. Once back at the main hub, head down to the bottom of the staircase and drop on through the opening in the floor, which will take you down to the basement. Now, we didn't have access to this earlier, but now we do. You can kind of see that with the helmet on top of your head, you're able to see in the dark. Overall vision, I think, is a bit better than it was in the Crystal Ball of Granny, since you can still kind of see the edges of the screen, even if it is a tad bit dark. But for the most part, it's a pretty standard area, and we're pretty much used to the platforming at this point. You have the giant spiky eyeballs that will fall down, more fire, and then plenty of those annoying bats, bug-type enemies that are going to kind of move across the screen you're able to easily jump on top of in order to take out. Like the bathroom area, there are exit signs, so that's helpful as far as making sure that you pick the right door, though there really isn't a lot of complication as far as not picking the right door is concerned, as long as you make it through each area. Watch out for the rotating, swinging giant mace balls of doom as you're making your way through this area. You have the conveyor belts that will try to push and pull you towards different spiky pits and enemies. Pretty standard platforming fare for the most part. In the next room, watch out for the flame being spewed right to the right of it before continuing over. You have a whole bunch more of giant eyeball things falling down and more mace balls swinging back and forth. Some pretty tight corridors, so you may need to duck under enemies or wait for them to bypass before you're able to get through each of the areas. Thankfully, while crawling, you can still easily get a lot of momentum moving-wise so that you're able to kind of stay on the platform, ducking and avoiding enemies and being able to kind of make your way. While the basement has a lot going on as far as enemies and things trying to like crush you or run into you and lots of spikes, it's already a pretty straightforward area of a pretty straightforward game, so that ends up helping as far as navigation is concerned. They don't really change up the variety of landscape when you're traveling throughout the basement, which is a good thing considering you're also dealing with the fact you can't see very well while going through. One of the only times it kind of changes up at all is right here, where you're going to be going to the left and grabbing the 2 question marks through the wall, which will be a bit difficult to find maybe your first time through, but other than that, it's pretty much just going straight. Collect both of these question marks as well, continuing over to the right, getting in between all of the spikes, as well as just the same kind of enemies and all that we've kind of been dealing with thus far. When you make it to the very end, though, you'll have to drop down and go to the right side. You'll notice another wall ends up appearing. Just kind of ignore all that, go through the wall on the right side, which will take you to that next exit. The good thing, at least, is we are starting to get near the end of the basement area. These enemies here, the weird kind of rotating circles that are all kind of connected, are a bit of a weird enemy that you'll have to avoid. After getting out of the next exit, there are these giant cannons that will fire out cannonballs. You'll have to use one of them like here in order to destroy the wall, as well as you can ride across other ones if need be. After blowing up in the first wall, you'll have to jump on another one and bring that down a little bit, which will destroy the next wall. Now this part is a bit difficult, probably the most difficult part about the lab itself. What you need to do is wait for this enemy to kind of come over. You can use the enemy to jump upwards and bounce off of it in order to get this question mark, which will open up the next area right after that. On here, you'll have a whole bunch of spikes below, and these bombs that drop end up blowing open the floor. Drop on down through one of the openings to make sure that you're able to grab that question mark. Then you'll be able to run down here and go through this segment. There's a switch that's a little bit difficult to see on the right side, and then when you get back here, you want to jump up in order to get all these blocks to appear, and then the cannon will blow open the wall so that you can get across the top section. After that, though, the area kind of opens up a bit. There's a lot going on, cannon blast coming your way, and you'll have to use the cannonballs to jump up to the platform and get to the exit above, which will take you to the boss fight. The boss for the basement is a giant washing machine. It will fire out clothing that will come your way and try to take you out, including clothes that will kind of rotate in a circle around it and then disappear after a few seconds. And you have to make sure that you stay far enough to the left so that you're able to avoid the clothes as they're coming your way. Kind of an interesting and creative boss to a degree, but still a pretty simple boss fight. And once he's defeated, we're moving on to the final area of Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt. The final area, once you've gathered everything else, you can go through the door on the bottom floor. You'll end up running into Morticia, and this will lead you into the ice-themed area, because of course, every good platformer has to have an ice-themed area. So now we're in here. This is the kitchen, basically, or the refrigerator that we're going to be traveling through in this particular area of the game. Climb up here, you're going to be able to open up a couple of blocks, which will then cause an icy staircase to appear. You can then kind of shortcut things a little bit. You can jump on this guy and it'll bounce you up to the top platform here. There's a lot of kind of hard to see question mark blocks and breakable blocks in the form of ice cubes that are on the ceilings and such of different areas throughout here. So keep a pretty attentive eye so that you'll be able to see everything and activate the switches so you'll be able to make it through areas. My first time making it through here years ago, it took me quite a bit to make sure I was able to kind of get through. I got stuck on a couple of occasions. You have a couple of weird enemies in this whole snow area, including the turkeys that have already been kind of like plucked and are cooked, but yet they're still kind of alive, flying. Kind of a weird enemy that you end up seeing throughout this area. Watch out for the killer, I guess, treasure chests that are kind of trying to chomp on you. Head over here to the left, and what you can do is you can kind of, because of the slipperiness of the controls already, plus ice, it makes traveling through here a lot more difficult than it needs to be. We have to kind of jump on these very small platforms upwards to get into the upper right corner. We then have to open up these blocks by hitting them in the right order in order to get the walls and other things to open up so that we can continue on. Now, this is where things get really annoying. You have a few of the question mark blocks that are on the floor, and you have to activate them by stepping on them, and you have to step on them in the right order in order to get other things to open up or to disappear for you. And this can be more difficult than it needs to be because of that slippery control. So be very careful on some of them to make sure that you hit the right switches in the right order so that you can make it through without too much trouble. This room can be pretty difficult to get through because of all the spikes on both the tops and on the sides of a lot of the platforms here. We hit that first block and make our way down here to hit the next block, which will open up the floor below us. When we head on down here, we're going to head to the left. Have to be careful of the spike that will kind of like fly up from the ground to the top. Over here in the right side, and then we're going to drop down in between the spikes. You can get in between them exactly, but you have to kind of make sure that your positioning is exact. Over to the left side, you gotta step on these blocks in the right order, which will then open up the area over here. Now over here, drop on down, you can hit this, and then crawl on through into the next opening. This will once again have you trying to step on these things in the correct order in order to open up, which can be difficult, but if you do it right, you'll be able to kind of sneak on through to the left. Destroy a few blocks, and then once again kind of crawl your way through the opening so you can continue on. Be careful of the turkeys as you head down, and a bunch of the ducks and more of the giant jumping snowballs will be waiting for you before we finally reach the door and complete that room. Thankfully, a much more straightforward room follows that one up, just a lot of platforming and plenty of things for us to watch out for. Next room, though, is a little bit more complicated. You have the ice blocks that will be moving that you'll have to use as platforms. Jump on this one to the left, and you'll have to jump up to hit the blocks to destroy them so that you can kind of squeeze through that little bit of an opening. Up here, crawl through and use the ice block to get over across a little bit of a gap. Just below us is actually the exit of the area, but we can't go there yet. Instead, we had to head to the top portion, and we're going to run all the way to the left and use these blocks, jumping at the right spots so that they end up appearing, and then we can stand on this one here to hit this question mark block. Once you hit that, then go back, drop on down, and hit the second question mark block, which will get rid of the wall just to the left so that you can end up getting to the door. In the next room, hit the block if you want to. Some of the money symbols will appear, and then you can jump up here on this block in order to hit another one. Head over to the right. If you do a nice jump, you can land on some safe spots along the way, and now you have more of these blocks that you have to hit in the right order as well as one below you, and then continue over to the right side. Right after that, you'll have more of the same and more blocks kind of just appear out of nowhere. When you make it to this segment, you have a lot of these question mark spots that you have to jump on. Follow kind of the pattern that I'm taking to do it. It's pretty difficult, but if you do it exactly right, you'll be able to get all of the platforms to appear that you need to, so that you can make it over to the right. Thankfully, though, that was the last complicated room. We just have 2 rooms left, and they're both straightforward, just running through lots of hazards coming our way, trying to prevent us from eventually reaching that boss encounter, but still, pretty easy overall rooms. You don't have to worry about hitting certain switches or anything like that. Be careful of this ice block kind of moving between all of the spiky platforms so you don't end up landing down below. And eventually you'll make it to the final door, and you can obviously tell it's the final door as they did a nice little setup here with the snow-like castle and the skull on the door. The final boss of the game is this big wizard guy. He drops on down, has kind of a weird looking background going on with all the sparkles. He then kind of swoops back and forth, and when he swoops on down, you'll be able to jump on his head. Every so often when he goes back up, he will spew lightning towards you, which can be difficult to avoid, as well as summon little fire skulls that when they fall to the ground and break apart, cause the little flames to go left and right. Since you can gang up on multiple hits in a row, it's pretty easy to take him out, and once he is done, you get to enjoy the ending to Addams Family, Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt. And this is the ending. The only difference between this and playing it on the hardest difficulty is it says, "Congratulations, you completed the hardest difficulty." The same exact thing, and then it goes into the scrolling credits. So, unfortunately, not a lot of effort was put into the actual ending of the game. So, even if you don't play on the hardest difficulty, you're really not missing out on anything in the game, just other than, of course, the accomplishment of doing so. Like I mentioned earlier, that it's not my favorite of the Addams Family games, but overall Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt is a decent enough licensed platformer. There's a ton of them, of course, available on the Super Nintendo and during this era of gaming, so it really didn't do anything to kind of stand out or anything like that, and the only reason I probably ended up playing it a lot as a kid was because it was based on the Addams Family. As the credits finish up, we then have one final The End, and at that point we can reset the game and start it up all over again. But with that, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.